again. Welcome back to Custodians of Crafts. I can't believe we're already on the fourth episode of the season, by the way. Today's episode is very exciting. It's about many things: climate, culture, creativity, but also it's about what it means to find your voice in unfamiliar places, to lead with intensity, but also with kindness, and to build something with heart from the ground up. My guest today is an old friend, someone I met during my fashion revolution days in Delhi when sustainability was still a whisper in the fashion world. And since then, she's become a voice that's loud and unapologetically global. Gunjan Nanda is a co founder of Entertainment and Culture Pavilion and the Dubai Climate Collective. She's led programming at climate summits like COP28 in Dubai, COP29 in Baku, and she's helped put arts and culture squarely on the climate agenda. Gunjan started as a designer in Delhi, but quickly adapted her love for storytelling into a cultural movement, and she's done it all. From crafting climate narratives at the UN and COP summits to building creative campaigns with brands like Apple. She's also created Chatty Changemakers, which is a brilliant card game that uses humor to make climate conversations actually quite fun, maybe a little uncomfortable, but in the best way. So if you're interested in knowing more about the game, we will be talking about it in the podcast. But if you want to help in the distribution or partnerships, please do look at the bottom of the video or the audio that you're listening to. This episode is about climate, yes, but also about migration, rejection, resilience, and the friendships that carry us forward. What happens when you bring your full self, passion, purpose, and play to the biggest issues of our time? We will also answer one of the most pressing questions within climate activism. What does culture have to do with it? Gunjan, welcome to Subject Matters Custodians of Craft. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. A little bit under the weather, but I cannot complain at all.
I'm super excited about the conversation because not only is it a very pertinent topic, I felt also in during the course of the research that it is something that I need to learn more about. So I think this is going to be a very eye-opening conversation for a lot of people who are listening. So we've known each other for such a long time now, and I watched your journey from like founding Wayne Studio, a design studio which was focused on upcycle garments, to editorial work, which I've read a lot of the work that you've done in writing in the sustainability domain, then managing several climate summits today. You started with fashion design at NIFT, and then you graduated recently from Middlesex University in Dubai and within the domain of global governance and sustainable development. So what's really stood out to me was that you have this passion for climate and environmental issues, and specifically at the intersection of cultures, community mobilization. So I'd love to hear more about this journey of yours. Like, how did these pieces come together for you?
No, thank you firstly for that introduction. That was perfect. Honestly, even I couldn't have put it in a better place, but thank you so much for putting that into context. I feel like my journey has always surprised me at every turn because I always used to think that it would go one way and then it just constantly kept changing. But I feel like precisely because of my determination to do something not just for myself as a purpose but also something in the space of social impact. So precisely why I wanted to take that my design education one level up and sort of connect it and connect the dots with like empowerment, cultural protection, climate justice, and sort of creating that narrative that there are certain pressing issues of our time and we need a lot of community, we need massive mobilization to make that happen. So yes, of course, the way you said it, I started out in fashion. I worked in the industry from design houses to startups. I founded Wayne Studio, which was a conscious and zero waste fashion label in India. And then that sort of experience made me realize that there are massive systems of overproduction, waste, and inequities in supply chains, especially in India, especially in Asia. So where we know that Asia is a region where traditional crafts and artisans should be celebrated, they're often sidelined in favor of fast fashion. We have brands like Zara and H&M that really does it really well in doing that. So in order to sort of lend my voice and also do a little bit of that editorial side of things where I wanted to showcase my experience, but also my thought process on what needs to change in the design industry. I did a lot of work with sustainable communications and agencies internationally as well. And just as, started out as volunteering with them so that I can just do feature stories. But then that picked up a lot of traction, and I started to do a lot more work in sustainable communications as a strategy, not as something that is just storytelling centric. So I conducted many campaigns. I worked with global organizations. I did a lot of work in the education space. And then from there, of course, I'm here now where I'm sort of merging my industry expertise of design, of climate advocacy, of sustainable cultural communications, programming, where, I have the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion, which I'm now a co-founder of, and also leading operations and programming. So this climate journey started off because I was introduced to this very impactful uh, platform called the Hollywood Climate Summit, which happens in Los Angeles in person and also virtually and every year. And then from there on, I met a lot of people within the space who are doing amazing things virtually as well. And from there on, the people that I met when I was in the US, I used to do a lot of frequent trips there. I found out that culture was like the one key touch point that everybody talked about. Like, why is culture not being recognized in certain spaces? Why is culture not given a seat at the table? Many youth voices, because we are the future of this world, this planet. So we also need to understand that there is a lot that we can do, and there is a lot that, people in power and people in authority need to understand. So culture was like one of the main touch points, but also something that I also found out was culture is one of the most underutilized tools in climate action. So in order to understand more about, culture and advocacy and policy making, the reason why we built the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion now, which is where we do a lot of events, and I'll talk more about the journey, is because of that shared passion with a lot of people. So we sort of founded this and also expressed this need to a lot more people. And then that pretty much created this movement. But in that journey, I did a lot many things, of course, like my master's education was one of them at Middlesex, where I learned about international affairs, foreign policy matters, global governance, and connecting it to climate issues. And I have also been sort of working with the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework for Climate Change. And basically, I was one of the founding committee members of an initiative called the Entertainment and Culture for Climate Action, which was this sectoral engagement initiative under the UNFCCC that focuses on decarbonization practices in the entertainment and media space. So a lot of the work that started out from within the UN systems then trickled down to everything that we are doing now. And because of the lot of support that we received from the UN is also why we're here in this space. So yeah, there was a lot that's a lot of information, but that's precisely how my journey has, given me this platform.
I think that's super fascinating because it's not just about being in the right rooms, which you said it started with being at the summit and at the Hollywood Summit, but also leveraging all the resources and skills you have. So I feel like you're one of those people who's been able to do that really well. And a lot of people ask me more about what conferences are for. I think it's for brimming fresh ideas, and I think that's where you've definitely leveraged your resources as well as your network. So congratulations on that. I want to share some facts and set some context before we deep dive into the pavilion's work, because a lot of the conversation today is going to really understand what culture has to do with climate for the uninitiated, including myself. But before that, I want to start with some facts specifically from the Global South perspective. So the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, explicitly states that vulnerability to climate change is substantially higher in developing countries, particularly in the Global South, with about 3.3 to 3.6 billion living in contexts that are highly vulnerable. We also know, just as an example, of this fact, Africa, for example, is one of the lowest contributors to emissions. However, In Africa, agricultural productivity has been reduced by 34% since 1961 due to climate change, and it's more than any other region. So, future warming will negatively affect food systems in Africa by shortening growing seasons and increasing water stress. So, similarly, in Bangladesh, China, India, Philippines, in 2019, each recorded more than 4 million disaster displacements. In Southeast and East Asia, cyclones, floods, typhoons, they have triggered displacement of 9.6 million people, almost 30% of the total global displacement. This goes on. What I'm trying to say is that we have developing countries which suffer economic losses from climate related disasters, which are 5 to 10 times greater as a percentage of their GDP than developing nations. But also, it's interesting that poverty is closely linked to climate impact. So, it is essential to reduce poverty and boost development. So, it's kind of a catch 22. First and foremost, I wanted to talk about the fact that we do have a specifically targeted global south conversation to be had. But then I want to bring in Entertainment and Culture Pavilion's mission, and I'll read it out for everybody. It is to foster global community where creative expression and cultural heritage play a pivotal role in promoting sustainability and inspiring eco-conscious behaviors. So let's deep dive into this. I want to understand why it is important to talk about climate and culture in the same breath, and what you actually define culture as would be good to know, and why is this mission specifically needed in the world today, like you mentioned earlier. So can you deep dive a little bit into that?
Yes, absolutely. So, from my understanding and perspective, climate and culture have always been interconnected. So, culture is what shapes our values, is how we interact with our environment, is how we even celebrate seasons. We have, our parents and our grandparents and our ancestors who have learned a lot of things, and that's how they pass down knowledge, and that is culture. Our food systems, farming, we have skills that we learn through generations and through many different mediums. That is culture. And that is how we've also been able to connect to people through stories, through theater, through music. And this is much more impactful than, any kind of policy jargon. Yes, of course, policy is needed, but that's not how people connect. And over time, the work that I have been doing, and that has focused a lot on mobilizing activists, artists, creators to bridge that gap between policy and public engagement. So if there's a way that we can simplify policy through culture, this is the way to do so. So I want to also, specifically look at some instances, like for example, in South Asia, we have, monsoon festivals, and we have rituals around farming and crop harvesting and agriculture, and even food traditions, which are deeply tied to climate patterns. So when we have changing seasons and rising temperatures or changing monsoons, our entire ways of everyday living is disrupted. So, in order to protect that, in order to sort of, conserve it, we sort of also have to conserve these dying rituals and these traditions that we think are not necessary to, the everyday living. There are sacred sites in the Himalayas which are threatened by glacial melt. There are, temples in South India, in Bangladesh, that are, at huge risk to rising sea levels. And this is all cultural heritage. These are heritage monuments and sites that we've seen growing up that have, shaped stories. So our work at the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion is that we recognize that climate change isn't just a scientific or policy issue, it is a cultural issue. And if it is a cultural issue, there should be means to protect it. So our goal is to center that storytelling narrative, creative activism, creative knowledge in climate solutions. And it's very essential that we have this mission in the world today, is because we need culture-based climate action more than ever, because people protect what they feel connected to. If you don't have that person connection with something, take for instance your ancestral home. You have so many things that you're connected to in a house where you have been brought up, your parents have been brought up, your grandparents have been brought up. Imagine one day it's being washed away by a flood or an earthquake comes and it destroys it all. So your entire life's memory, mementos, everything will be, forgotten. Everything will be forgotten. So how do we conserve that heritage? How do we make sure that we and our future generations can protect it? So that's precisely why it is very important that climate and culture should be talked about in the same breath, and why this mission is needed, and what exactly is, Entertainment and Culture Pavilion is doing to sort of foster that narrative.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It reminds me a little bit of this Ghanaian principle called Sankofa. It basically means it is not taboo to go back and fetch what you forgot. So essentially, to move forward, you kind of have to go back to your roots a little bit. And I think it kind of works around that principle, your work. So we'll talk about the entertainment element of the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion in a bit. But before that, I want to talk a little bit more about stakeholders within climate action ecosystem, because I feel like, again, the climate conversation happens at multiple levels. There are independent players like yourself. So there are activists, then there are corporates at one end of it. There's governments and policymakers, and then there's citizens. I hope I'm not missing anybody out, but broad stakeholders. And so I want to understand how stakeholders' powers, incentives, and challenges lay out within this ecosystem, right? So,
Mm.
what is the agency we have, and what are the challenges each one of them have? As you know today, of course, I mean,
Mm.
hopefully it'll change. It is changing, hopefully, but I would love to know what you think about the framework today.
No, that's a very interesting question, because I think it's also essential to create that sort of bridge for them as well. Of course, first identifying what each of them offer, but also what each of them kind of lack in. So, in order to simplify that, I can, categorize each one. First, we can start with creatives and artists and activists. People like me, we're storytellers and we're mobilizers. We have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of perspectives, and precisely because we know that our home is in danger, and also because we have a lot to say because of the experiences that we've been brought up in. And right now, what's happening is that due to the many events and conferences and summits around the world, we have climate weeks, we have COPs, we have many, many things happening. But a lot of the youth is not given access, maybe due to resources, maybe just due to tokenism, due to many other reasons. So they often lack the funding and the infrastructure to sort of, share a voice or share an opinion. So it's like we have the power, yet we cannot do anything with it. So these are creatives that can actually execute something very tangible, but they don't really have the resources to make that happen. And then, of course, we have the philanthropists, the foundations who do have that infrastructure, who do have that foundation and that backing, but they don't know where or how to invest that, or the fact that they have very rigorous and exhaustive processes with, applying for grants, with having those systems or those databases built where projects or initiatives or sort of communities can apply to those and actually connect. We have corporates that also have the resources, but they need to shift from greenwashing to actual accountability. And I say this why? Because we have the shift now that is happening, that a lot of companies and multinationals are recognizing the need to have sustainability within their departments. That's a start. But then it doesn't just stop there. Like, you cannot just start a sustainability department, hire someone internally who does not have any knowledge of sustainability, and then sort of expect them to lead. You need people to be trained for this. You need sustainability reporting and accountability mechanisms in place. You need to understand how this works. So, precisely why they will have all the resources in the world. But in order to shift from greenwashing and to actual accountability, there needs to be some mechanisms. We have governments and policymakers who have the power to set the agenda, but cultural solutions, climate frameworks are rarely prioritized. We have seen now with the news how things are heading forward with the Trump government, with people like Musk in power. And so it's like the change was right there at the cusp of something, but now it's like it's starting to slowly go backwards. So We need more people who do recognize and realize that we need specific scientific policy, climate policy in these frameworks, cultural solutions in these frameworks, and specifically from indigenous people who have owned the land, lived in the land, and are actually capable to make these decisions. And then, of course, we have the communities and citizens who face the real impact, who are in a very vulnerable stage right now, but they're again often included from decision making processes. So the job is to bridge these different buckets. If you can bridge, for instance, the creatives with the philanthropist, with the policymakers, bring them under one roof, talk about what the challenges are, talk about what where the real need is, that is where actual change happens. And, sort of making sure to track that growth is also very essential. We've been doing a lot of programming at the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion to create these mapping sessions, funding sessions, storytelling sessions, where we bring these kinds of people from certain international agencies, from artists to creators, from philanthropists who are looking to invest in real change, and from people who are basically living to recite their tale. So we've seen that impact, and those connections stem from like the first pavilion we did at COP28 in Dubai in the Blue Zone. And I'll talk about more of the statistics and the data and everything as well. But we did over 120 events across 12 days of COP. And that was like a massive, massive sort of push from our end because it was our first try, and going into COP is already an overwhelming space. And when you're meeting with these stakeholders, when you're sharing your issues, your concerns, and everything, there are a lot of feelings in that room. There's a lot of shift happening in that space. It's just that you're not able to grasp it or comprehend it in that moment. But when you see the impact from, these different spheres mingling together, it's very interesting to see the kind of grassroots impact, and also that is really changing into or integrating into different spheres of the climate space.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I feel like when you talk about different stakeholders, I think if I was looking at the how COPs have played out in the last couple of years, for example, if you just look at the private finance mobilization, a lot of developing countries frequently cite finance as, the major trust issue in
Yes.
climate negotiations. For example, I think even their goal was to leverage $100 of private finance for every $10 of public money, but it has shown in the latest data that mobilization ratio actually lies only at 1 is to 0.3, which means for every public dollar mobilized, only 30 cents of private investment is mobilized. So, like you said, tracking that progress is really important. So, is coming up now. The 30th COP or COP 30 will be held in Belém in Brazil in November this year. And it has had positive impacts. So, it has mobilized significant climate finance, I want to say. So, we know that there is a step in the right direction, but commitments remain voluntary, which is, I think, one of the biggest fallbacks. If you ask, limited enforcement mechanisms are in place. And of course, you have a lot of ambitious rhetoric and very little follow through. So I want to talk from the culture space specifically for you. You've engaged with COP Summit for several years. And recently we were talking about this also, that how it has a tempered support towards culture based ideologies. So, in the larger scheme of things, how do COP policies support or hinder heritage based climate action on the work that you're doing?
Well, it does both because yes, as you said, that this is a step in the right direction. COP over the years, of course, has now increasingly recognized the intersection of culture and climate, especially in the recent years, since I would say ever since COP28. And this recognition was evident in initiatives like the Group of Friends on Culture-Based Climate Action, which essentially talks about, the differing nations who have signed on to sort of integrate culture into their, agendas and their national agendas and the climate policies. And then, in Dubai, we had the launch of the Emirates Declaration on culture-based climate action, which sort of acknowledge, acknowledge the role of culture, heritage, and the creative industries in addressing the climate crisis. I know that the, policy level recognition, yes, is a step forward, but of course, there are many, many things to consider. But I will talk about how this has supported culture-based climate action, and then sort of also highlighting how we need more of that inclusion and how it has hindered the process in some ways as well. I would say, COP26, COP27, COP28, we've had a lot of indigenous voices being incorporated and a lot of traditional knowledge into the negotiations and the global climate discussion. So we have a lot more representation and, these people have a seat at the table so that the actual final text that does come out of COP has some level of, inclusion in that aspect. We have the Loss and Damage Fund, which, also acknowledges the impact of climate on cultural heritage, which is a means to provide financial relief to the communities that have been impacted over the years. Although that structure, I would say, is still evolving, and the final amount that is being pledged is nowhere near enough because we need trillions of dollars to actually make that happen. But I would say, yes, it is a step in the right direction. We have, like I mentioned, the Emirates Declaration that at COP28, which was a landmark moment. Finally, that culture had a seat at the table, and we had involvement from the UNFCCC and UNESCO processes that also encouraged a lot of cultural resilience as part of the adaptation strategies. We now also have more funding mechanisms through COP, like the Adaptation Fund, which has started supporting projects that integrate a lot of this cultural resilience knowledge. And because of these COP processes as well, we got more, I would say, funding models and nature based solutions that are more centered to grassroots growth. And they offer a lot of opportunities to integrate those heritage protection within sort of broader climate financing mechanisms. And like there are a lot of initiatives that we work with as well and that have been doing a lot to protect cultural heritage sites and monuments in different regions, and they are getting a lot of support from international funding mechanisms through the COP processes. But I would say this all needs a lot of work. The progress is very slow right now. And with the rate that we are going at towards destruction, it's just that the pace needs to match up. Even within climate financing, there's a lot of marginalization and there's a lot of bias. There's more, I would say, prioritization towards renewable energy and carbon reduction, which is essential. But then adaptation and cultural resilience has less of a priority. We have a lot of implementation gaps, which is, commitments that have been made at these COP processes. They are not necessarily all of them are turning into action. There are many COP pledges like the NDCs, which are cultural perspectives that are embedded in national climate action policies. They sort of remain only aspirational due to lack of clear accountability and tracking mechanisms. So also because of that, we know that it is very much connected with, the global north being dominating a lot of these negotiations, a lot of these conversations. There is a lot of power imbalance. And when there is a lot of power imbalance, you only highlight and support the issues that mean the most to them. So in these, high level negotiations, there's a lot of talk and no action. And we're seeing, especially now with the US presidency and how that is going to shape other nations and their agendas, it is very dangerous. So I feel like a lot of the growth that has happened in the climate sort of framework is just going to go in the opposite direction. So, which is precisely why we need double the amount of effort, double the amount of sort of resource allocation. So, yeah, I mean, it's like we have a very interesting road ahead. We have these mechanisms in place, a lot of these mechanisms in place. It's just that we need to somehow match up to the pace that we are actually going forward with into implementing them.
I'm especially curious, what are some of the events you've organized? I would also like to know what impacts they've had. So, how are you measuring their success? Because it can be a bit nebulous, specifically because there are multiple stakeholders and it's not something that you see results of immediately. So, I think it's also interesting for companies or organizations like yours to be able to get some insight on how to measure progress for causes like this.
No, absolutely. So The ENC Pavilion, which is the Entertainment Plus Culture Pavilion. Entertainment is something is it's a very, very powerful tool that we have in our hands, which consists of storytelling, film, music, performance, poetry, visual arts, any kind of like creative practice that we are using to change the narrative. Our generation, and of course, I would say our because I'm a millennial, and but a lot of the Gen Z generation is so, attached with social media, with the kind of content that comes out of it, with the narratives that they are also changing through platforms like Instagram and TikTok. And a lot of the content that we also see on screen, on streaming platforms, on, you know, Apple TV, on Netflix, it really, sort of changes your perspective on a lot of things. And precisely through our events and activation, we are trying to create spaces where climate discourse is not policy heavy, but also engaging, emotionally resonant, and also inclusive of the different kinds of perspectives that exist in our world. The first, as I mentioned, the first COP that we were a part of was in Dubai. We hosted like around 20 events over 12 days that sort of made up to 40% of the cultural programming at COP28. Um, Something to sort of also remember is that we were the first ones to bring a dedicated space for culture in the blue zone. And when I say blue zone, it's literally the most heavily influenced zone because a lot of the policymakers, the decision makers, key stakeholders, you know, from agencies like the UN and also from the studios, all of the different studios that are working within the entertainment and media space, these are the people who are a part of these rooms. And in order to influence them with the kind of storytelling that needs to come out, there needs to be a lot that needs to be done in order to make that happen. We had 300 plus speakers from 67 plus countries, with 70% of them identifying as BIPOC or from the global south. When we started this, we never intended that we will have a specific target audience, either from the global majority nations or from the global north. But we saw that there was so much more traction from the global majority nations. I mean, it was very moving to see how many people actually really wanted to showcase their art, showcase their passion, and also showcase the work that they're doing within their own communities and their regions through creative practices. So because of this, we were able to gather support and funding, from some institutes and foundations who believed in our mission and our work, even though it was the first time we were doing this. And we were able to engage 175 plus partner organizations, and 40% of them were based in Africa. So this generated a lot of media buzz, a lot of press, and we were able to generate at least 150 plus press stories, reaching 230 million plus readers with our combined media partnerships and with the combined platforms that we had across the climate influencers and media organizations who were supporting us, which in turn had a media value of $2.1 million. So you can see the sort of massive impact of, buzz that it would have created across COP, to the point where even UAE press was also deeming this as COP's most influential zone. I'm not able to remember the exact headline, but precisely why the NC Pavilion had a major hub for storytelling, for artistic interventions, for performances. We had indigenous people perform, very moving pieces of song and dance. We had sustainable fashion showcases featuring designers from Africa and South Asia. We had cinema nights, we had cinema screenings from filmmakers and activists and artists. We even, in fact, showcased the film How to Blow Up a Pipeline in Dubai, it was very like, I think we were all very scared of how it was going to turn out, but we never actually sort of mentioned the name of the movie in any of our marketing materials just so that, we don't get shut down. but people knew what we were talking about. So it was great that it was like a code name that was out there, but we never really used it. And we did a lot of, dismantling petroculture sessions, exposing fossil fuel influence in the creative industries at COP. So to do something of that, you need a lot of courage. We even surveyed a lot of the individuals who did attend our pavilion and were a part of our activations, and 90% of those surveys said they felt hopeful about COP spaces after they attended our pavilion. So to say that there is real change that can be made, there is progress that can be had.
That's massively impressive. I think both in terms of media that you've been able to capture, but also creating inclusive spaces from the point of who the target audience is. And like you said, like Gen Z or the younger generations are going to be more and more stakeholders in climate conversations. You change the medium for those generations. But I want to ask more about community mobilizing. It requires strategy. It's hard skills, but also whether it's for not profit or not for profit, I think the incentive changes. You have community for each of those domains, but how do you learn these skills? Like, is it some, can you share some practices that have helped in building these communities in the past, specifically in a more phygital world, because you have so much conversation happening offline, but also a lot of the mobilization, I'm sure, is, connecting people through social media. So I would love to know some of your philosophies or practices or strategies that have worked for you in the past.
I feel like this is a very much like, trial and error based, because there are a lot of things that have worked for me. Like I've done hundreds of things and I've tried like probably thousands of others that have not worked for me. It is very much trial and error based. But yes, I would say that even though it's great that we are connected through digital platforms and there are ways to meet people from across the pond, but not everyone is on social media, especially like the most impactful people who are doing the work on ground. Not a lot of people want to talk about it or even want to, showcase that. So always using different mediums. Try to meet as many people in the room as you can and strike conversations about who you are, what the other person is doing, and try to align with their interests. Because a lot of I would say, the kind of friends that I've made or the partnerships that I've built has happened like in closed rooms where I'm actually able to meet with people. And then being open to ideas. So because we know that in this world, especially Western solutions don't always work everywhere. So respecting that local knowledge and the perspectives that, each person has grown up with is very essential. And like I it's just there are a lot of things that you can do in this space. Like I studied fashion, worked in fashion. I learned a lot about storytelling and aesthetics and consumer behavior in, my previous life, as I would like to call, which included engaging people a lot. So when I sort of pivoted to social impact, I realized that a lot of those principles that create or strategize on, brand marketing can also mobilize movements. So you really don't need to have like a sustainability degree to do these things or even learn these skills. It's just about, if you are passionate enough and if you can implement what you've already learned into something you can do for social impact, that's great. We need more people, like for instance, in finance sectors, in tech sectors, in AI, to even sort of revolutionize the social impact space from these specific sectors. We don't have a lot of people who are shifting the needle or moving it enough from one sphere to the other. So I think it's very essential to relearn those principles and sort of, create that into something moving. And then you can do a lot of, grassroots organization within your own community. So um, I would say that even within your own neighborhood, if you feel like you want to sort of create a campaign or try and see that if people around you are interested in doing like, a community meetup where you can share ideas, because that's also how I started in Dubai. When I came here, I did not know anyone in the region. I was a newbie, and especially challenging sustainability and climate specific conversations in the UAE is not easy. And you have to pick the right place, the right kind of people, and the right kind of terminologies and words to attract a crowd. So I started out with like a very simple climate cafe, which was like, just come share your concerns about, your life as an expat living in the UAE and what kind of challenges you've faced and good things and bad things. And, if there are any tips you've learned, and because that was also something that I wanted to learn specifically since I was new. So that sort of hands-on learning really helped me also organize like community sessions, workshops, etc., and learn from the people who have been doing this for decades, because that is key. There are people in this realm who have done myriads of things, and you can learn from these people who are so heavily loaded with wisdom and knowledge. There's so much you can learn from them. So having that shared vision with these people is so essential. And then, of course, like try to work with different contexts. So career wise, I would say if you're coming from a place of like, I want to grow my portfolio or my career journey and I want to stick to one thing so that the next time I get a job, I don't have a difficulty because my profile is speaking in a certain way. But I would say that the more you branch out and work with different kinds of companies and people, you will be heavily invested with a lot of different kinds of skill sets you might need, not just for your own growth, but also for people who are looking for a leadership mindset. So, a person who is a leader, he or she is not only invested in one kind of skill, which is leadership or mentorship, but he or she knows everything from finance, accounting, managing, coordination, comms, advertising, everything. So I do feel like the more that you branch out with different contexts in your workspace, the more that you might have more of that, mental capability to lead and to mentor more people, and also having that space to create, and empowering other people around you to participate more. So yeah, there are a lot of things that I've learned in my career and still learning, but it's I think it's about just making it also fun for you, because if it gets boring for you, then you know it's you're not gonna enjoy doing the work that you do, and you might not put in that same amount of passion and determination sort of towards the work that you do. I believe that's it.
You're unstoppable, I feel. I love some of that advice. I love all of the advice, but I love some of it specifically because it's very realistic. It's not a nebulous idea. It's like, this is what you can do today. We definitely need a climate cafe in Paris as well. I love that idea. But have you had mentors or friends who've had an impact on you?
This is always a tough question, and I never have like the right answer for it. But I would like to start off by saying that everyone who has rejected me or denied me a role or opportunity in some way has had a huge impact on how I've, gone from there, because I always know that, I want to prove them wrong, like, build something for myself so I can come back to their faces and be like, well, regardless of your offer, I still did something in the space. But I would say the people that I am working with now, especially my co-founder, Samuel Rubin, he has been in the space for the social impact space for 15 years. And, he is someone who knows a lot, especially, building a movement, building partnerships, the right kind of partnerships and social impact. So I would say definitely there's always constantly something that I learn from him. And then somebody I also look up to is, which I think you would also know, Jane Goodall. I mean, she's the one who's unstoppable. Like she's 90 years now. She's 90 years old and she's traveling the world. She's working towards things that she's always, been determined and passionate about. And she always has this, huge smile on her face whenever she talks about things that matters to her the most, which I think is so beautiful. And she's so effervescent about it. So I feel like she's definitely someone I look up to in this space. In knowing, unknowingly or not, like she has been somebody who has guided me in many ways. But yeah, like of course, I would also. I mean, there are a lot of people, honestly, who have had a huge impact. It's just that it's just that if I start naming them, it's going to be very difficult to keep track. But yes, I would say that my parents have always also been someone who knowingly and unknowingly have had a huge, huge impact on the kind of work that I'm doing. Like my mom, she has been working with a special needs center for children nearly her whole life. She's now the COO and she started as like a HR accountants person. And the amount of, and the energy that she's had when she started doing this work, and she's been a part of this foundation in Dehradun in India for like a long time now. I feel like I've seen a lot of what she does, and I've sort of also understood what it takes to do the work that is purposeful. And I would say it's the same with my dad. He has been a homeopathic doctor for all his life, and I've always seen him caring and tending to others, even if there were patients who had no money to spare and couldn't really offer any payment for the medicines. So he's always been like, oh, it's okay. Like, as long as you're okay, like, I don't need anything from you. So I feel like that sort of a philosophy has always, stuck by me. Like, initially I used to be like, why would you do that? Like, this is a business. Like, you are a doctor and you are doing a service. So you need to be paid for it. But then slowly and suddenly, like when I grew up, I realized that maybe he's just doing this for his own benefit, and he wants to feel good about the kind of service that he's giving to others, and not just as a doctor but also as a human being. So like the more like I really understood that philosophy from both my parents about this.
Yeah, it's super inspiring, especially like the story of your parents. I think it's definitely, I see that you mirror a lot of those philosophies, from having known you for so many years. So, Gunjan, thank you for that amazing conversation. We have this rapid fire section, which I personally really love because it's kind of gets a little bit silly towards the end. So it's a little bit more relaxed. So if you're ready, I'm going to start shooting them out.
Go ahead.
So the first one is, what is your biggest achievement so far or something that you're really proud of?
All right. So I would say speaking at the UN stage, and also the fact that I was broadcasted live, which was a huge, huge thing for me, but also like I was very nervous. Graduating with a master's degree and also working with Apple for their Earth Day campaign.
Amazing. Those are all fantastic achievements, I must say. Okay, fill in the blank with one or multiple words. 2025 is going to be the year of.
Massive community building.
One word in Hindi that describes your work with Entertainment Culture Pavilion.
I think jigger. I would say jigger is because like you need a lot of courage to get into the space and do the work. And हिम्मत चाहिए इस काम के लिए. And if you don't have jigger, I don't think you can survive in this space.
I love that word. If the pavilion achieves its mission, what would the world look like to you?
I would say a world where climate action feels less like a crisis and more like a collective movement, where I would also say like projects like ours, have constant stream of resources and support systems rather than something we have to fight for.
Okay, and partnerships that your team at Entertainment Culture Pavilion has done that you're most proud of? I know this probably is not an easy question.
There are many because I would say each partnership has had like a very profound impact on the way we've grown because there have been big partnerships like with British Council, with the UNFCCC, with now the city of Bonn, who we would be partnering with this year for the SB, with even organizations like the Global Strategic Communications Council, GSCC, through which we released a very important research briefing called Legacy Solutions. And there are many grassroots partnerships, honestly, that I'm very, very proud of.
What are you listening to or reading during your travels right now?
Listening to, I would say Chappell Roan. and Bad Bunny. And then so I've been reading this small novel called Kim Jong Born 1982. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's actually a very interesting one.
I'm going to have a look at it actually. No, I haven't heard about it. What fashion brands are you buying from right now? I love that question specifically because I'm just curious what people are buying
Yeah,
right now.
all Indian brands to be honest. Lovebirds and Cord are my current favorites, and I think always have been since a while. And then Aroka, um, because of their styles. Cord because of the patterns and the colors that they use, which are just gorgeous. Lovebirds, I mean, there is no reason why I love birds. Love lovebirds, but it's just. And then also COS for their formal wear. Like I love their silhouettes.
One emotion for Dubai would be.
I would say it's like a cup of kadak, like kadak chai. It's like you'll see it everywhere, and it resembles community because karak, like a cup of karak chai, is something that brings people together, but it's also something very, unique in its own way. Like it has its own flavor and aroma, but it's also something that is very common for everyone. So I would say it's like a cup of karak.
So, Gunjan, last question for today is what is one product that you've launched in your work with Entertainment Culture Pavilion that you're very proud of today?
Well, I would like to talk about this beautiful little colorful game. This is a climate card game called Chatty Change Makers, which serves like an icebreaker that and a platform for people to connect, learn, and take action on climate change. So it has a lot of thought-provoking prompts, even funny ones, and we sort of let people do the decision making, in this. So it really has these different kinds of characters. You'll see very colorful ones. There's a grandma who is, doing gardening. She has tattoos on her arms. There is this little fella who is riding a bike with a tote bag and listening to music, maybe a podcast even. There is a person who is holding a protest sign, says, "Don't be trashy." And we have a lot of these more very different characters, but on the back we've got different categories serving a very different purpose. So we've got categories like vision vault, which sort of makes you think of different scenarios and different future, like imaginative scenarios in the world, and how would you want to respond to it. So imagine a museum in 2070. What do you think it would showcase? So, you will think about the different kinds of artifacts in a museum or something of that sort. And then we've got cards like Chattermania, which is a different category and talks about simple questions and reflecting on your experiences and your journey. So, who do you admire in the climate space and why? What's a book, documentary, or piece of art that shook up your perspective on environmental issues? And even questions like, tell us about the time you teamed up with fellow environmental champions to tackle climate hurdles. And we've got a lot of these different categories. The most fun for me is radometer. So it's like this very popular social media trend on, I don't know if it was started on TikTok or Instagram, but this was like you have to rate this person out of a 10. So it's like they're a 10, but they think wind turbines are secret portals to other dimensions. They're a 10, but they are CEO of one of the top polluting companies. So you can think of, someone who has a very huge admiration for people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or stuff like that. They're a 10, but they still get 10-cent plastic bags at the supermarket. So it's like you kind of have to really think of, different kinds of versions of this. And then one that we devised was called conspiracy clapback. So these are actual quotes set by fossil fuel CEOs, by senators, by presidents, prime ministers all over the world. We don't name them, but these are quotes that are actually said. So the idea is, how would you have a hypothetical conversation with them if this person was to say something to you at this moment right now? So it's like they're saying, if we stopped emitting altogether tomorrow, not only would it have no impact, but undoubtedly other countries would simply increase their emissions.
Wow, that's a tough
And
conversation to be had.
yeah, and then another one that has said fossil fuels lift people from poverty. So,
Right.
it's like the idea of thinking outside of the box and actually looking like, okay, so if I need to devise a solution or even a way of storytelling or a conversation from this, how am I going to, create something from this? So it's really a way for people to also have conversations, but at the same time, think of something that pushes them a little bit further. This has been something that I work very hard for and has been very passionate about.
I love it. I love the title Grandma as well. So I'm going to link this up if people want to have a look at it or buy it. It would be, I think, a great Christmas gift.
I
Thank
know.
you so much, Gunjan. This was such an inspiring conversation. I feel like you've achieved so much in such a short period of time and you're unstoppable. I think your conversations in an entertainment culture pavilion are going to go so far. I wish you all the very best in your endeavor and thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Shrini. Thank you so, so much for making me do this.